This week, President Trump's successful swing through Asia. Republican senators sound the alarm on Biden administration abuses. And Gen Z continues to trend more traditional. These stories and much more straight ahead this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stegall. And now, let's meet our panel, the men and women behind the stories at ReadLion.com. Josh Mann, our managing editor, Adam Wittenberg, and Michaela Estruth, both great reporters and contributors at ReadLion.com. Panel, welcome in today as we jump right into the big news. President Trump overseas this week, doing some big trade deals with Japan, South Korea, and maybe, he says, some big stuff with China, Josh.
That's right. He's on his way back now, probably aboard Air Force One, expected to arrive back this afternoon in time for the White House Halloween party. Trump, in true Trump fashion, rated the meeting with Xi, the Chinese leader, a 12 out of 10. That sounds very good, but specifically what Trump said was he will reduce the extra tariff that he had put on China from 20% to 10%. The effective result will be a 47% tariff. China is agreeing to buy soybeans, Vance says, 25 million metric tons by January, which is a big deal for the farmers, and also sorghum. China is going to give access to rare earths, critical minerals, and magnets, the president also said, and then also are agreeing to help stop the flow of fentanyl. So we'll have to see, when the rubber meets the road, is that really going to happen? But also, as you said, big deals with Japan and South Korea, more investment, some mutual investment as well. And so it does seem like a successful trip. And of course, it seems to be one of the president's favorite things to do, to make deals.
It's funny, Adam, I've been hearing some, not lots, but some, even on the right, criticize President Trump in the middle of a lockdown, shutdown, whatever you want to call it, on Capitol Hill, that he's overseas and somehow, ignoring domestic priorities. How do you see it?
Oh my, that's so sad. Again, look at the precedent. I'm sure every other president has been conducting as much business as normal as they can. And keep in mind, this is a political gridlock engineered specifically by the Democrats. Republicans vote consistently to reopen the government. The Democrats consistently vote against it. The Republicans don't have a big enough number to do it on their own. There has to be Democrat cooperation. So it's nonsensical to think that Donald Trump would suspend all of his activities, and these are good things he's doing for this country, good trade deals, billions of investment, tremendous stuff. It's completely nonsensical, and it would be a win for Democrats if he didn't do these things when they're the ones refusing to play ball.
Michaela, you see it that way? Do you think, we'll get more shutdown details coming up a little later on the show, but can President Trump walk and chew gum at the same time here, be overseas doing deals, and monitor the situation on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think it goes back to the model that our founders set up, which is three branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. So the legislative is what's currently creating the government shutdown, and they are the ones who are supposed to be fixing that. So, of course, President Trump, we don't want the executive branch to just sit back and do nothing. In fact, he should be executing his role, and I think it is a testament to his leadership and the authority that he has, that he's going around and traveling to all of these countries and representing America, staying strong, and then also, meanwhile, governing situations back home as best as he can.
Changed the media's narrative from the East Wing renovations to something else, I guess, for the week. But Adam, we turn to West Virginia. We always like to talk about school choice stories here, and you've written one about West Virginia specifically.
Yeah, this was a really refreshing story to read because Delegate Kathy Hess-Cruz just said it in black and white. She said parents are leaving the public school system because it's failing their kids. It's not working, or they don't agree with woke policies, bad test scores, kids being neglected. And this was kind of in response to a pro-public school guy who was criticizing school choice and saying all these things like, oh, you're trying to bankrupt public schools so there will be change. And she's like, really, we're just empowering parents here. It's common sense. And that's what we see time and time again with school choice. It's actually about parents voting with their feet, being empowered to choose what they know is best, and not being forced, de facto forced to rely on a government system.
Okay, we'll shift to you. Gen Z. You know it well. Are you technically, I don't know, are you technically a member of Gen Z?
I am technically a member. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Well,
but
no,
I do
I
fall
mean,
in.
you can speak to this with authority then. There have been some seismic shifts culturally in the way Gen Z has been behaving. We've talked about everything from politics to faith, and now even screen time.
Yes, so UCLA, the University in California, just published this report. It's called Teens and Screens, and it's an annual report, and it surveys 1,500 students, which I didn't know this till this week, but that's actually the national number for an accurate polling representation of nationwide beliefs. And so what this says is that Gen Z wants less sex on screen, less explicit content, and in fact what they want is more friendships depicted, actually male-male friendships or female-female friendships, and less romantic relationships. And then it said if they did want romantic relationships, what they actually want to see is the friendship between the male and the female, the man and the woman in that relationship developing on screen, not the physical aspect. And surveyors and the reporters said that they thought this wasn't necessarily a rejection of romance, but more that the teenagers wanted something that they could relate to. And I would push back a little bit and say I think it's a return to accurate romance, to what the relationship between a man and a woman should be, and a rejection of what culture has defined as romance, which is all physical, and there is no relationship on the friendship level. And I mean, that's what the relationship ultimately of a marriage is between a man and his wife, is they're friends for life. And so of course young men and women want to be seeing that, and I think that's an encouragement.
I'm so intrigued with the Gen Z generation. My kids are members of it. You know, I have a 20-year-old, a 19-year-old, a 17-year-old Josh, and I think all the time, you know, when we think about whether we're talking about this subject, whether we're talking about phones, the conventional phone today that we carry in our pocket, the computer in our pocket, that's not that old. It's only about a little older than my kids are, but they grew up with it. I did not, and I think I'm seeing in their generation a real shift in even the way they see it. Like they kind of reject it, and they seem to be returning to tradition. Is that what you're noticing?
Yeah, and I have a lot of questions still about this generation, and I think we always do. I mean, these polls come out and we learn, and hindsight's 20/20. But I wonder if the pornification of culture, if they've become so saturated that finally they're like, okay, enough, and maybe they just feel like they're getting it too much. Those devices, I mean, are portals into pretty much anything your mind could think of and more. And yet there does seem to be a rejection. We are also seeing a rightward shift that a lot of people on both sides of the aisle are observing. I even heard a clip from the last couple of days from Jake Tapper talking about his own children and how he just thinks that it's a more conservative generation, that maybe because progressive policies have failed, but maybe because of these other media trends or social media trends we've seen, they're just kind of fed up and done with it. At the same time, we're seeing hints of revival, and maybe some of these things are coming together. So we'll have to continue to watch and pray.
Adam, your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I think this survey and what we're talking about is sort of a cry for help from this generation. I mean, they're addicted to their phones. They're on media all the time. And this kind of reminds me of when they do polling about, do you like negative ads and attack ads for politicians? The populace says, no, we want ads about the issues. We want ads about constructive things. We don't want attack ads. But then do you know what ads actually work? It's the attack ads. That's why politicians keep making them. So I think this generation is crying out. When they're given the chance to choose, they're saying, no, we want real relationships. We want real content, not just sex and all this other stuff. But if there's no way to actually get there, they're just grab the phone, what pops up? It's the same old junk. It's the same old junk. Someone's got to come in to fill that void or guide these younger folks into, you can do life differently. You can make different decisions.
We'll spend a little time a little later in the show talking about this next story, Josh, but the auto pen, the use of the auto pen, and Joe Biden's presidency, pardons now being looked at specifically. Were they legal to use an auto pen when, in fact, he didn't necessarily himself physically sign off on various pardons? Are they legal? And there's more. We'll talk about Arctic frost and operation some Republican senators are very upset about, too, coming up. But, Josh, your take on this so far?
Yeah, so the House report has been released. I don't think there's any huge surprises here. Certainly, Republicans feel like the auto pen was abused, and this does get a little bit political, and Democrats are, likely to defend Biden to the end. But clearly we've seen already from both sides clear concerns about his health decline, the frequent use of the auto pen, and the ethical question of if the auto pen was used for these pardons, are they still legally valid? And so I think if you can look past the politics, you have to question it. You do have to question whether these pardons are valid. The DOJ apparently is looking into it. We'll have to see if anything's actually done about it in the days and weeks ahead.
I don't think it's difficult for most Americans to get their minds wrapped around the idea that whoever the president may be, regardless of party, Michaela, you'd like to know that they are physically signing off on pieces of legislation or pardons and not some machine or some functionary in the office doing it for them, right?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago with people complaining that President Trump is traveling and meeting with foreign leaders. Well, do you want a president behind closed doors, not even potentially in the room, passing legislation or passing executive orders? That's what some of the studies and research into this have found, is that President Biden might not have even been in the room, which is scary to think about. And I feel like it should unite us. I wish it didn't create party lines, because we should all rally behind, no, we want the person in office making these decisions and holding the pen.
And Adam, I'll throw it to you because we are going to get into this in a little more detail coming up. But is this a real issue? Some would say it's one of the most significant scandals in American history.
Yes, this absolutely is, and don't let anyone tell you differently. But unfortunately, and we've touched on this a few times, the same media that covered for Biden for all 4 years of his presidency is now covering, in many cases, for what happened during that presidency. It's very hard for these folks that spent 4 years propping him up, defending him, not calling out obvious mental gaffes and other things, to now get on to, oh my gosh, yes, this was happening. And from the early days of his presidency, it's very hard for those same folks to engage in the truth when they spent 4 years lying.
Bit of news here at Lion Week in Review. We are moving into a new studio in the new year. So in our present form, this will be our last show for a couple of months. You may hear from us, but maybe not see us in this particular form. But I thought I'd ask the panel before we take a break and get to the rest of the news of the day. You'll have these stories every day at readline.com. That will not change. They're not going anywhere. Is there anything in particular, Josh, we're watching in the next couple of months before we reconvene in 26 at readline.com?
Yeah, I mean, geopolitically, we're still eyes on Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, China on trade, minerals, and AI. Speaking of AI, the last one that I'll mention is I'm concerned about the electricity use that we're seeing. I think we need to watch this deal with China. Apparently, they're going to buy some American energy. I don't think America's going to have much energy to sell. I think we're a little bit behind on that. I think it's a really big issue that government is going to have to think about, and tech companies are, Trump wants tech companies to produce all of their own power. That's just something we need to watch and be mindful of. And Adam, the stories you're watching.
Yeah, actually, there's a story I'm working on about an AI-powered tutor or schooling system, really, that's already taken off in Texas at a private school and is starting to expand and will soon be available for free on a broad scale, and really has the potential to shake up education. So that is something that I'm watching and working on reporting.
And Michaela, how about you?
I'm definitely digging into my generation, Gen Z, and everything that they're finding and pushing back in our culture. I also am keeping an eye on the FDA's promise to review the abortion pill, mifepristone. We haven't seen anything come out, but we have seen the approval of the generic pill, a version of mifepristone, and just kind of pushback from conservatives and Christians on that. So I'm following that, as well as cases before the Supreme Court this fall.
Bookmark it. Check it out every day, every single day, throughout the year, every week. readlion.com for all these stories and so much more. When we get back, sights and sounds from Capitol Hill, Arctic frost. Have you heard much about it? The senators not just upset about the auto pen, but they're big time upset about that too, and we'll get into it with the panel next when the Lion Week in Review rolls on. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. If you miss any of this show or any show, you can always catch us on YouTube and read these stories each and every day at readlion.com. Let's dive into some of the big news of the week, which was Capitol Hill. Arctic frost, if you haven't heard about it yet, more details came out specifically about it. Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt, Senator Ted Cruz, just two of the senators fired up about it. Let's listen.
Judge Boasberg gave a speech about how he was going to thwart the Trump agenda before he got those cases. He was not the assignment judge. The D.C. courts have a daily assignment judge. He wasn't the assignment judge. He's on vacation. Somehow gets these cases at 1 a.m. Was he tipped off? Did somebody tell him these cases against President Trump and his agenda now were coming? I don't know. We should find that out. But Judge Boasberg, what he did to Senator Cruz and maybe other senators, absolutely, and I don't say this lightly, absolutely is worthy of impeachment proceedings. There has to be accountability. The American people have heard a lot about this, and you're going to hear more. We should have Watergate-style hearings on this for months.
I am right now calling on the House of Representatives to impeach Judge Boasberg. Judge Boasberg put his robe down, stood up, and said, "Sign me up to be part of the partisan vendetta against 20% of the Republicans in the Senate." That is a dereliction of duty and a violation of the judicial oath. And I want to thank Chairman Grassley and Chairman Johnson for pursuing this tenaciously like a dog on a bone. We are going to get the answers of every person who signed off on this abuse of power, and mark my words, there will be accountability.
Those senators were just a couple of the voices. Some 430 names and or organizations tied to Republican politics were apparently swept up in this. Much of it signed off on by one federal judge named Boasberg. This particular judge, as it specifically related to Ted Cruz, signed off on surveilling Senator Cruz, getting records on his phone from AT&T. AT&T said no. In fact, the law states that AT&T has to tell Senator Cruz that they were looking into his records. Judge Boasberg signed off on an order that told AT&T effectively no, they could not share with Ted Cruz that they were looking into his records because he may destroy them or what have you. So, Josh, where do you start with this? I mean, it's big stuff. Do you think we could actually see an impeachment of a federal judge over this?
I think we could. I think this just continues to unravel. We continue to learn more about Arctic frost and the weaponization of government and the judicial branch. I mean, that is scary. I don't blame Senator Schmidt for his rhetoric, and obviously Cruz is upset because he was targeted. But if you have a judge who's sort of willing to do this and play politics in this way so explicitly, and you're probably thinking it will never be discovered, that's scary stuff, and it does need to be investigated. Now, the promise of accountability, we hear that all the time. I think, we'll have to see. Are they really going to hold anyone accountable? Will anything really change? But it's scary stuff and real reason to be concerned.
Government surveillance of any American citizen, whether they hold office or not. I mean, we're talking about United States senators here, Michaela, so average citizens, I wonder what one would think is potentially possible with an activist court and an average citizen, never mind a U.S. senator.
It just recalls images of Orwell and dystopian futures, I would say, of the government, but happening here and now, being able to spy on government officials. And so, yeah, like you were saying, Chris, how should we as common people feel? Are they digging into our phone records? I mean, even the smallest things from talking to your phone in Siri and how much information they have on you and your location and all of that is something that American people should consider, and I would say take precautions to keep things private, to have VPNs and to keep their information confidential, because if this can happen at a government level, what is happening below that?
I've heard some say, Adam, that impeaching a federal judge, while it's well within the bounds of the Constitution and the rules for the House to do so, many people say, oh, well, that's off-putting or that looks bad or what have you. But this, I mean, if ever there were a time to discuss it, it seems like it would be now.
Well, it's relevant to discuss, and I think these men, Senator Schmidt, Senator Cruz, and others, Chuck Grassley, are doing a commendable job digging for the truth that did not want to come out. But one problem that we often have is the media characterizing this as misinformation, retribution, sour grapes, any number of things. And again, the same media that was complicit or went along with these things. Let's not forget it was under Obama that some of these wiretapping things got the restrictions got eased or the legal precedent got eased. And so they've kind of been going along with all of this for a long time. And I do not expect fair treatment of what these gentlemen are doing. And so it's worth discussing. It sounds like it could be worth pursuing with this particular judge who's shown a clear activist streak. But will it get there remains to be seen.
The First Amendment, obviously important to the work we do here at readline.com, and anybody who values speech, the ability to report, talk. Social media has come into play in a big way. Barack Obama regularly makes think tank speeches these days, and this subject seems to come up a lot about what we do about certain kinds of speech we don't like. And here was something he said this week about that.
Part of what we're going to have to do is to start experimenting with new forms of journalism and how do we use social media in ways that reaffirm facts, separate facts from opinion. We want diversity of opinion. We don't want diversity of facts. That, I think, is one of the big tasks of social media. By the way, it will require some government, I believe, some government regulatory constraints around some of these business models in a way that's consistent with the First Amendment, but that also says, look, there is a difference between these platforms letting all voices be heard versus a business model that elevates the most hateful voices.
Now, Josh, I don't know about you, but when you talk about there will have to be a government element in monitoring this, what I hear is a violation of the First Amendment. I don't care how you paint it.
Yes, and it reminds me of where we were at 1 year ago, and really for the last 2 years, we've been really concerned about censorship with the Biden regime, administration, Kamala Harris, and some of the things that we were worried about in a Harris presidency continuing. It kind of sounds old, actually, but what is most interesting to me about that clip is hearing him apparently speaking off the cuff about these ideas and trying to find, you could tell he was trying to find words. First Amendment came right out of his mouth, but then he was trying to think about how do I construe the government's involvement in censorship. And so he was careful because he knows that that's a tough issue and maybe even likely unconstitutional.
Yeah, Adam, I mean, does government have a role in somehow governing how social media executes itself or allows people to communicate on it?
Well, we've already seen the colossal failure of this during COVID. Just 4 or 5 years ago, once something was put up as, the truth is, this virus is super deadly, or the truth is this vaccine works, anyone that tried to say, wait, it doesn't, or this isn't what they're saying it is, was branded misinformation, censored, taken off, stripped of their account. And this was with the government's backing and intervention. And so, folks, we don't want to go down this road. We need the free engagement of ideas, and that's also why people were so threatened when Elon Musk bought X or Twitter and turned it into X, because he actually believes, or says he believes, in free speech and allowing these diverse viewpoints. People like Obama don't.
With Arctic frost, Obama's comments, J.D. Vance addressed a Turning Point event this week and said this to a questioner in the audience.
Here's something that I want every conservative to remember. It's an important part of my entire political philosophy is we cannot be afraid to do something because the left might do it in the future. The left is already going to do it regardless of whether we do it. That is the takeaway of the last 40 years.
He then went on to talk about his faith.
Christian values are the idea that you should respect every single person as an individual, whatever the color of their skin, created in the image of God. That's a Christian concept. And in fact, it was a Christian empire, Great Britain, that abolished slavery to begin with. The idea that we should eliminate child sacrifice. What did the Christian settlers find when they came to the New World? They found a lot of civilizations that were murdering babies in weird religious rituals. It was Christianity that said we don't kill children just because they're somehow inconvenient to people. A lot of the things, human rights, the very idea that human beings have rights are a Christian concept. And so I'd ask you, my assumption based on the question is that you're skeptical of Christianity, or at least of certain public professions of Christianity. One of my favorite Bible verses is, "By your fruits ye shall know them." And I think that the fruits of the Christian faith are the most moral, the most just, and the most prosperous civilization in history. I make no apologies for believing that Christianity is the pathway to God. I make no apologies for thinking that Christian values are an important foundation of this country, but I'm not going to force you to believe in anything, because that's not what God wants, and that's not what I want either.
So, Michaela, Turning Point USA, where he was speaking, that particular event, thought to be largely made up of your generation, the Gen Z generation. Are we looking at the future nominee for the Republicans? And if so, does he have an enthusiastic backing from your generation?
I would say he has a very enthusiastic backing, especially from that pool of my generation, Turning Point USA, conservative, Christian, young men and women. But I will also say that I admire his character and the way that he's avoiding that question, or even telling my generation and any other voters to wait. I saw a clip just this morning of him at that rally, people cheering 48, 48. And he said, we're not even halfway through this administration. The work is not nearly done. And that's what we're focusing on right now. I would also point listeners to readline.com, where he sat down and did an interview with Miranda Devine and talked even more about his faith. And I think it's just crucial that our vice president is talking about his faith and talking about how important that was to our founding, and is so bold in that. And I think a lot of that has to do from his friendship with Charlie Kirk and then his recent assassination, that Vance is now bold, and I just applaud him for that.
Finally, we are into, as we record this, a full month of the government shutdown. No end in sight as we talk today. It's not going well for Democrats, even in friendly venues. Listen.
You might think, given that the Republicans are in charge of both the House and the Senate, that a government shutdown might actually hurt the Republican brand. But in fact, it hasn't. If anything, it's been helped a little bit. Take a look here, the shift in net popularity versus pre-shutdown. When we're looking at the Republican Party overall, that brand actually up 2 points. That's within the margin of error, but clearly it hasn't dropped. Come over to this side of the screen. Look at the net approval ratings for Republicans in Congress. It's actually up 5 points since pre-shutdown. So what we're seeing here is the Republican brand in Congress has actually improved somewhat compared to where we were pre-shutdown, despite the fact that Republicans control. And that's the math that John Thune and Mike Johnson are looking at is, well, hey, why should we give, and electorally speaking, when our brand has actually improved a little bit?
Now, we say their position is getting better. With whom?
Yeah, okay, with whom? So I think it's two groups that it's so important to keep an eye on. All right, change in the Republican Congress's net approval rating versus pre-shutdown. It's rallying the base for sure. Look at this, the net approval rating up 12 points versus pre-shutdown. But it's not just with the base. It's also with the middle of the electorate. Look at this, among independents. It's up 8 points as well. So we've got a situation here where Republicans with the shutdown are actually rallying their base, but it's also something that's not hurting them with the folks in the middle. If anything, it's helping them with folks in the middle. And this is the type of math that if you're Republicans, you like to see.
Also, Melanie Stansberry, who is a representative in New Mexico, 1st District Congresswoman, spoke with Jake Tapper. And Tapper, who, traditionally is considered a sympathetic voice, was giving her a rather hard time about why she wouldn't just vote to fund a clean CR.
Should the Democratic senators from New Mexico, your home state, vote to open the government so that these SNAP funds are not at risk?
Let me be clear. The administration is choosing to starve American children with money that they already have appropriated.
I'm not applauding
their
tactics.
By the White House.
Well,
this is a choice by the White House.
This
they
is
are
also,
choosing
Congresswoman,
to cut
this is
off
also a
food
choice
assistance.
by Senate Democrats
No,
to not
it
vote
is
to
not.
open the government. Yes, it is.
So, Josh, how does this play out ultimately, do you think? Are Democrats going to cave?
I don't know. I mean, I think they will eventually. I don't think the Republicans will. And the sort of flip side, or the thing that makes me a little sad about all of the polling we can do now and how quick it is that the parties do take that calculus into consideration. And I kind of wish that they would just do the right thing regardless of how it plays. But we know the parties are looking at the polling, so clearly the Republicans are going to stay steadfast and say clean CR, and the Democrats, I think, are going to continue to feel the pressure. We saw a left-leaning union come out and say you got to open the government. I think they're going to have to cave.
And Adam, final thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Let's not forget that the Democrats had voted 13 times for clean resolutions to keep the government going. This came out of nowhere. It's political. It's not based on any moral high ground. They're not offering anything better, and they've chosen a really bad issue to camouflage their political intent. So I don't see the Republicans caving anytime soon.
Panel, always great to spend time with you. Won't see you in this studio ever again. We're going to be in new digs coming up in the new year. Thanks for being with us, as always. Now, when we return, we'd like to wrap up with a celebration. The 250th birthday of our country coming up next year. We've got a little segment called Faith and Freedom 250 when the Lion Week in Review returns. Welcome back to Faith and Freedom 250, a series from the Herzog Foundation. As we count down to America's 250th birthday, we're revisiting the faith and principles that built this nation. In this episode, we turn to one of the most important figures in our history, George Washington.
No history of the United States is complete without discussion about one man, George Washington. Few figures in our nation's story rise to his level. As a soldier, statesman, and president, he distinguished himself time and time again through decades of service, helping to found and lead a fledgling nation. Washington is remembered for many things. His bold and daring maneuvers during the War for Independence were balanced by his caution and wisdom as president. These two approaches may seem contradictory to us today, but perhaps not to Washington and those who knew him best.
George Washington held a lifelong conviction that guided his actions from his first military engagement until his last official message to the nation. He believed that the hand of divine providence was at work in his life and in the lives of his countrymen. This conviction is most clearly seen in his farewell address, published September 19, 1796, just weeks before that year's election for the nation's top office, the first in which President Washington himself was not a candidate. He used the occasion to impart several important messages for the nation's future leaders. Washington's farewell address has become one of the most read presidential writings and is often a required reading for any student of American history. Since 1862, the full text has been read aloud every year in the United States Senate.
According to most modern summaries, Washington made two key points: avoid foreign entanglements with European powers, and beware of the development of political parties in the United States. With those warnings, he identified the root causes of many crises his successors would face, from John Adams to Donald Trump. But there's another message Washington conveyed in his final address to his country, one that is often overlooked: a message about faith. Washington stated, "The propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of right and order which heaven itself has ordained. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion, and morality are indispensable supports."
Later in the same message, Washington pressed further, asking, quote, "Where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths? Which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle." End quote. Washington's message was clear. For our nation to survive, religion and morality are required. He called them indispensable supports, without which America could not stand.
Washington's focus on religion and morality wasn't just political rhetoric. It was the culmination of a lifetime of personal belief. Time and time again throughout his private and public life, George Washington demonstrated his reliance on a higher power. Washington's religious views were shaped at an early age. As a young man, he copied the 110 Rules for Civility in his own hand, instilling him a code of conduct for a Virginia gentleman. These lessons rooted in moral precepts that reflected Christian values. During the Revolution, as commander-in-chief, he understood that victory on the battlefield required more than just artillery and tactics. It required a higher moral purpose to rally the troops on the field and the citizens at home to the cause. Washington structured his forces to include a chaplain for each regiment to tend to the spiritual and moral necessities of his men. He called for public days of prayer and thanksgiving during the war, not only for his soldiers, but for all Americans. Washington insisted that the colonists' freedom required a special blessing from God, and that blessings could only be delivered to morally upright and righteous people.
As president, tradition holds that Washington added the phrase, "So help me God," to the end of the oath of office in an impromptu but powerful message that his own success relied on a higher power. Moments later, in his inaugural address, he explained that no people had more reason than Americans to thank the invisible hand of God for their national blessings. That same year, his Thanksgiving proclamation urged countrymen to give thanks to Almighty God and seek forgiveness for national sins.
These weren't isolated gestures. They were the actions of a pious man who believed he and his fellow countrymen owed God, or Providence, a higher power for their special place on earth as free men and women. Washington's farewell address was the final act of his public life, leaving the nation some of the most carefully considered advice ever written. He lived with the firm knowledge that his successes and good fortune were not his doing alone. His long tenure in public service gave him the perspective to urge Americans to maintain a religious and moral society. From his vantage point as a world leader, even as new as his world was, he saw clearly what happens when a society abandons religious faith for a purely secular system. Time and again, he was shown that morality and religion must go hand in hand if liberty is to endure.
George Washington's words still resonate. His belief that America needed faith and morality at its core wasn't just for his generation, it was for ours, right now, here today.
Washington lived with the knowledge that his success was not his own, but blessings from God. His final words to the nation remind us that freedom cannot survive without faith. This is Faith and Freedom 250. Join us next time as we continue to uncover the faith that built America.